Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Simon spoke with journalist Tanya Gold.
So Tanya spoke about her long-running freelance career across a very broad range of British and American outlets. She spoke about her experience being at the centre of a furious Twitter storm earlier this year, and about her also long-lasting but so far unfulfilled ambitions to write books.
Enjoy!
So I'm here with Tanya Gold up in North London. She's briefly in town from a visit from her rural idyll. Tanya, thanks so much for finding time in what sounds like the middle of a pretty intense period of deadlines for yourself.
Oh, yes.
How many is it?
I think I have 5 for Monday.
Okay, well, thank you. We're on Friday afternoon, so thank you for sparing time.
It's a pleasure.
I wanted to talk first of all about writing about Britain for an American audience. So the pieces, particularly from Harper's, that you sent over. We've had a number of people who kind of do this thing. So we've had Sam Knight and Ed Caesar who write for The New Yorker. I do a bit of it myself. But, you know, what do you see as your kind of shtick, for want of a better word, when you're doing that? What is the thing that you're trying to do? And, you know, the topics you're covering here, the monarchy, the kind of Labour anti-Semitism stuff, what is your thing when you're doing that kind of work, do you think?
Well, I'm worried that my answer will be terribly disappointing, and we might touch on this again later, but I don't actually think about who I'm writing for.
Okay.
I have one column in The Spectator, my food criticism column, in which I write for a specific person, which is my husband's uncle.
Okay. Why him?
Because I'm very conscious of value and what's good. And if I'm reviewing an expensive restaurant in London, I always imagine whether Uncle David would enjoy it and whether Uncle David would think it was worth the money. So that's one column I write for a very specific person in life.
Does Uncle David know this?
Yes, he does.
Okay, right. Yeah.
He's thrilled.
Okay, good.
But with my other writing, and this has got me into trouble, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
I write for myself.
Okay.
I write a paragraph and I think, is that a good paragraph? Do I think that's a good paragraph? Is it funny? Does it tell you anything? So I don't really think about an American audience as specific from a British audience. I just try to write something that I think is good. At Harper's, obviously, and to a small extent at the New York Times, I cover things in Britain because I'm on the ground here,
yeah.
And I write about the things that I'm interested in. I'm very interested in great British institutions. You know, probably because my family are Jewish and we've been here for a couple of 100 years, but I don't think you lose that sense of. I haven't lost that sense of being an outsider because I was very much brought up close to the British establishment, and so I'm very interested in all these gilded institutions, and I like to think that I can write for American audience about that with a certain amount of knowingness.
And what kind of feedback do you get from, you know, both the editors you're working for, but from, you know, readers in America and things like that?
Well, my first piece for Harper's Magazine was about very high-end restaurants in New York City,
yeah.
The restaurants of the super rich, the sort of places they go to in succession.
Sure.
And I went over and I did 4 of them, and I thought they were loathsome.
Okay.
And very overpriced and ridiculous and sort of a cult, because you were going somewhere and you were eating food that really wasn't very, very, very nice for a huge amount of money, served sometimes by people who were really quite rude. So I wrote this piece and it was called A Goose in a Dress, and it was my first big piece in America. And lots of people liked it, and some people really hated it. I got killed on Twitter by the woman who's now the food correspondent of the New Yorker magazine, and rather, as she live blogged reading it, her disgusted response to reading it. What's very funny is she later admitted, they're not in the context of this, that she had gone to Per Se once, which was the restaurant I mostly hated, and had a very bad experience there, but was too scared to say anything about it. Because I understand, and luckily I've never had this at The Spectator, because at The Spectator you can write whatever you want, and you don't pay for your meals, and the last thing on anyone's mind when you're writing a piece is what the restaurant PR thinks, but I don't think it's the same in America.
Hang on, you don't, or you do pay for your meals?
I don't.
Okay, who pays?
Well, I think sometimes in America they might pay, and if I don't know...
with The Spectator, who's paying for the meal?
Oh, the company pays. The Spectator pays.
Right, the magazine pays.
Yeah, the magazine pays.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they pay or not in America, but I understand they're much more worried about what... They seem more respectful over there. I think marketing maybe has quite a big hold there on some of the websites.
Well, let's come back to that in a minute. Can we talk then about your kind of own career in in journalism, you 20 years of this, and how it started and how it progressed and how it kind of moved to doing what you're doing now.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that. Well, I started as a gossip columnist.
Okay.
I worked at the Ephraim Hardcastle Diary at the Daily Mail, and I worked on the London's Diary and the old Peterborough column at the Telegraph, with lots of people who were exactly the same age, and we all drank far too much.
Okay.
And we had a wonderful time. And I wonder whether the silliness I developed there, because the perfect diary story, someone once told me, is getting the Archbishop of Canterbury talking about his dog. It's
why is that?
Because it's funny.
Okay.
Because it's unexpected. Because it's cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
If you can get serious people talking about very silly things.
Okay.
Or silly people talking about very serious things.
How would you ended up doing this kind of diary stuff? You were fresh out of university at that stage?
Yes, I did a history degree, and I did the ring round in the summer. You couldn't do that now. You couldn't get into a newspaper just by ringing up and asking. And I managed to get onto Female at the Daily Mail.
Okay.
The Daily Mail's women's department.
Okay.
A very intense and funny place.
Why so? This is what sort of, we're talking sort of early 2000s here? Or?
No, 1998.
Okay.
1998. Well, it was just, I'm very fond of the time I spent at the Daily Mail. I worked there as a feature writer, and I'll talk about that in a bit, because I think maybe some readers will go, oh, you worked at the Daily Mail and you didn't spend your whole time walking around in high dudgeon. Actually, I was in high dudgeon, and I did eventually leave.
Right.
But I found it, as a writer, a fascinating place to contemplate. And what was fascinating about Female is that they were writing about such, silly things with such intensity and professionalism and often anger.
Could you give an example?
I can't really think of an example of when I was on Female then, because I wasn't on for very long, but I would just, 15 hours a day of shouting to produce, stuff about how much money the Duchess of Cornwall spent on clothes.
Okay. Who were the shouters and who were the sort of shouters?
Oh, the editors were the shouters.
Right. Okay.
I think the culture's probably changed now, but there was a lot of shouting in that office.
By the women as well?
If they were senior enough, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, we often have people, we talk about people's progressions through careers, and, with this kind of first job sort of thing, whatever it is, it's quite easy to kind of look back and say, like, it was all glorious and fun. Like, was it actually doing the diary stuff? Or, speaking with, we try and have, complete and radical honesty on this show. So, like, if you are, it's 1998, you're 1 year out of university, is it actually fun being sent to a party to find out the Archbishop, or is it a bit grim?
Well, it's the old truth, isn't it? What are you remembering? Are you remembering the job, or are you remembering the fact that you were 25 and now you're 45? Well, it's complicated for me because I wasn't very well at the time, and this might come up later because in a way you could say that my big break in my journalism career is when I started writing about my recovery from alcoholism.
Okay.
And I was a using alcoholic, and I was sick, and bad things happened, and people told lots of very funny stories about me, which are funny in retrospect. But I suppose the truth about being a diarist is I came from a very suburban, bourgeois upbringing, and suddenly you're being invited to all these hallowed places in central London. I'd be sent off to the Royal Opera House at 11 o'clock in the morning to do, to interview an actor. And
sure.
I think I realised as soon as I got onto the diary how magical, the potential for how magical journalism could be in that it allows you to live in other lives, in other people's lives. The
passport element of it.
Yes, to places, and also, for me, more importantly, to people.
Sure.
So it's like a TARDIS. It's like a magical machine that takes you to incredible places.
And so with, only as much as you're comfortable talking about here, but with, with the alcoholism and the writing, how did those two things overlap then? You said that your break was writing about recovery?
They didn't overlap so much then. They do overlap far more now.
Okay.
Well, luckily I was only being, I only ever had to write no more than 150 words. That was the maximum.
Sure.
And I would like to say that I think working on a diary, is a great way to learn journalism.
Right.
Because, if you're lucky, and I had Peter Mackay at Ephraim Hardcastle and Sebastian Shakespeare at the London's Diary, they train you. I think being asked to go in on your first day and write 1,000 words or to be a columnist when you're in your early 20s is very, very hard. Because you've only ever got one great column in you, I think, when you start.
Okay.
So, the work was easy, but I was very unwell. But when I wasn't in hospital, I always worked. Okay. And, I suppose that, you could say that the fact that I was a diarist made me worse, but, because I was always at parties where there was alcohol available. But the truth is, I think I would have found the alcohol anyway.
Sure.
He'll joke about I'd swim to New York.
When did you first write about recovery then? Or write about alcoholism?
I stopped drinking.
At what stage?
In the room next door. My last drink was in 2002.
Okay.
And I stopped drinking, and it was a really bad time. I felt I mean, I don't want alcoholism to sort of take this interview hostage.
Sure.
But my writing is very, very important to my recovery.
Is your recovery important to your writing? Is it true the other way around as well?
Writing has become a drug to me,
right?
On which I'm absolutely dependent. And if I don't write to a certain level, I really, really struggle.
What do you think about the sort of broader, literature of recovery? Thinking, James Frey or Foster Wallace or, things like that.
Do you know what? I haven't read them.
Okay.
I tried to read Foster Wallace once. I like his journalism very, very much.
Yeah.
But I suppose I don't want to read about other people's madness. I've got enough of my own.
Sure. Okay.
Reading about, I don't ever spend time with drinking alcoholics, and I don't really want to read their testimony. It doesn't mean that I don't respect it and I don't love it, but it's too close. And what I look for in writing, my favourite novelist by some margin is Hilary Mantel.
Okay.
Because of the perfection of her cadences and her sentences and her poise and her control. So when I read for pleasure, I am looking for that control. I'm looking for that poise.
Yeah.
So I don't want to read David Foster Wallace on his madness, though I loved the piece that Jonathan Franzen wrote about him.
Sure, yeah, about the kind of difficulty.
Because it had all that poise and it had all that control.
And so you say, and again, I don't want to
ask me anything you like.
But on so you say when you stopped drinking in 2002. When do you and then you write about this?
Yes.
When
I was very lucky in a way, very lucky. I stopped drinking in 2002. And I was kicking around the Daily Mail, writing Free Frame Hardcastle and doing a few features, which I'll tell you about in a minute because I just thought they were great fun. And I wrote a piece for The Guardian about the Priory Hospital. And I was very lucky to have been allowed to go into the Priory Hospital, though actually it didn't make me better. And I had to go into rehab again. So I was in the Priory in 1999. So I wrote a piece for The Guardian. Actually, I'm wrong. I was writing for The Guardian at that point on an informal basis, but I was still very young, 2004. And I wrote a piece about the Priory. Okay. And I had a very good friend who was a journalist, and he was more experienced than I am. And I've always thought that everyone has a great piece in them, professional writer or not. You just need someone to pull the truth out of you. The writing is easy. It's how far will you go to tell the truth? And he said to me, when did you realise you were an alcoholic? And the first thing that popped into my head was I knew I was an alcoholic the day I mounted Brian Sewell, which was an allusion to a terrible day at the Evening Standard, which was probably my sort of nadir.
Brian Sewell, the art critic?
Yes.
Okay.
I was blind drunk on vodka at about 11 o'clock in the morning. I sat on Brian Sewell's lap.
Okay.
And then
for readers who are not, or listeners who are not familiar with him, could you paint a brief word picture of Brian Sewell?
He's dead, Brian Sewell was the art critic of the Evening Standard and a very lovely and interesting gay man.
Okay.
So you could call it performance art, and they called me an ambulance, and it was taken away, and I had to, and I did stop drinking forever very shortly after that. So I said, and that was the first line of my piece. I knew I was an alcoholic the day I mounted Brian Sewell. When I said that everyone's got one great piece in them, at that time in my life, that was mine. It was something I really, really knew about. So I wrote a piece about the Priory and about alcoholism, and they put it on the cover of G2, and it was on the banner above the title in the old Guardian, the big Guardian, and it said, I knew I was an alcoholic the day I mounted Brian Sewell.
Yeah.
And that was my first. Yeah, I suppose it was my, quite literally, I'm sure there's a pun in there.
I mean, I know, David Carr, the former New York Times, this critic who wrote his book about his drug addiction, he said that, there's this sort of narrative that you get clean, you pull yourself together. At some period after that, you write about it. But he said, he was pitching his recovery story while he was still in rehab and stuff like that. For him, it was much. He produces in that his letters to editors of him trying to sell his sort of redemptive narrative while he was still really in the thick of that. Do you think there is a tendency or a kind of a pressure from editors or from the way that publishing works to frame something in a neater teleology in those contexts than maybe the lived experience of it is?
What you mean, editors are looking for those kind of
the redemption
stories?
Story.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's this constant pressure as journalism becomes, more nonsensical, because good journalism is expensive.
Yeah.
To get people to mine their own trauma.
Sure.
But it was good for me to write that piece, and I wanted to write that piece because I don't know if you know this, but possibly the defining psychological character trait of alcoholism is shame.
Right.
And I was so ashamed of what had happened to me, and I was so ashamed of what I'd done, and because I didn't know then, 20 years ago, that it wasn't really my fault.
Yeah.
That it's that to write about it, we're back to poise, and forming yourself within sentences. I found it, if I could write a funny and good piece, if I could write something worthy, then, that I would begin to forgive myself. And that reminds me of a line that Howard Jacobson, who is another writer I absolutely adore. I adore his novels and I adore his journalism. And he said, I write to make me again.
Okay.
And, I feel the same way. And I don't know if the me that I write is the real me, rather I think it's the me I want to be. It's a person who's certain and sure and poised and knows what to say and doesn't just sort of gabble or cry.
Were you ever concerned? I mean, there's such a history of writers and alcohol, right? It is if one looks at the lineage. Were you ever concerned of, like, if you're trying to produce something that's stylistically so poised, so tight, that there is a risk of cliche as well in writing about one's experience with drink? So many people have done it before.
Well, I would say ignorance is bliss now because I haven't read any of them.
Okay, sure. So what then
who are they?
God, it's. I'm trying to think. Who was the J.G. Ballard? A lot of there's a literature of, Kingsley Amis, people like that. Like, I think that there is a vein of it. But I'm also conscious. If you're doing that in 2004, it's like that is before the advent of the personal essay industrial complex, right? It's before.
Great phrase.
Yeah, but before that stuff, kind of exists. Do you think that was to your advantage that there was less kind of confessional writing in the ecosystem at that stage?
I can't say. I think I'm quite good at it because I have no boundaries. I have to remind myself to have boundaries. I've written pieces that I hope no one ever finds.
Sure.
Yes, and it's very easy for the lazy journalist or the poor journalist, to make a whole career, but it never ends happily. The great example, of course, is Liz Jones, who...
Could you explain? I'm not familiar with...
Oh, Liz Jones writes the back page of the Mail on Sunday magazine,
right.
And her modus operandi is to mine her own life for her trauma in such, on a weekly basis, so much so that I imagine, and I say this with compassion and with respect because I know Liz and I like her and I think she's a very good writer, that you wonder if she's doing things just to have things, to write about. She didn't create the column. The column is creating her. Yeah. And it's very easy to do that, and it's particularly easy to do that if you're a woman, because I would like to say that some newsrooms are still so gendered, and when I was starting, they really were. And they still are. And there are still certain newspapers where if you're a woman, you'll be on this section, and the men are writing about politics, and the women are writing about fashion and sex and marriage. Yeah. So it's easy to do that. And I think there were times at the beginning of my career when I did fall too much into that trap, and I wrote a lot about being overweight and so on and so forth. But, I'm not happy.
Do you regret doing that?
What's the point of regretting anything?
Right.
There are pieces I'm ashamed of course.
Sure.
But you can't write. How many words a year do you have to write? To make a debate. You can't write 200,000 words a year without being ashamed of some of them.
Do you write 200,000 words a year?
No. I probably write 100,000 words a year.
So what was your progression then? You have this big piece in 2004 in The Guardian.
Yes, and then I worked for The Guardian.
Career? Okay, on staff?
No, I've never been on staff.
Okay.
And I never stay anywhere. It's like a compulsion. I don't really want to go into that because I don't really want to understand it. And I don't really understand it, and I don't really want to sort of bore the readers with it because it's really not relevant. But I've never... I've been on contract. So I was at The Guardian. I was having a lot of fun at G2 under Ian Katz.
As a features writer?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was really jolly, road testing roller coasters and doing, lots of silly stuff, but some really serious stuff as well. I went to Israel to interview the children of Nazis who converted to Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
And that will always be the kind of journalism I like to do best. You travel a long way and you learn stuff and you meet people and you mine their lives if they'll let you. But journalism like that is expensive.
Sure. And,
me and my trauma is cheap.
Right. Okay. So The Guardian under Katz, and then what's your read after that?
Goodness, I was struggling to remember because I have worked literally everywhere. I was at the Telegraph for a bit. I covered the 2010 election.
On contract, or what was your kind of, as a freelance?
Everything informal.
Right.
Always.
Okay.
I was at the Sunday Times magazine for about 4 years, where it's some stuff I was pretty proud of.
Yeah.
I did a profile of Russell Brand that I was proud of. And
Why so? Why particular?
Because I get him. And I followed him around for months, and I went to his salon where he, because Russell is an alcoholic, like I am, on the record. And at the time, you may remember he was engaged in, just before the election, where he reluctantly endorsed Ed Miliband.
2015, this is not 2010, right?
Yeah, that was 2015. God, was it really that recently?
And
he was politically interesting at that point.
Yeah.
And I was interested in whether he had anything interesting to say about populism. And so I went to various salons he gave where he would sit and he would perform. And, you say there are you could say there are a lot of narcissists around at the moment. It seems to be a very fashionable illness. There's one in the White House.
Sure.
There'll probably be, you could argue there's one in Downing Street. And he just seems to me, a very interesting man and extremely unhappy.
And in terms of, that, this is kind of on the Anglo-American journalistic difference, but, that kind of following someone around for months, spending time with them, very much in the American magazine writing tradition. Did you find, that as opposed to the sort of British, like, sit-down, features writing thing, if you sit down, you have lunch with someone, you knock out 1,500 words, did you find yourself being more attracted to doing that kind of more ambitious, more...
Oh, God, the American model every time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the dream. And I mean, I was very lucky that the Sunday Times, were willing to fund that.
Yeah.
And Harper's too.
Yeah.
It absolutely produces the richest kind of journalism. I'm not saying that there isn't a value, because I completely forgot that I was a columnist at The Guardian for 4 years when we were talking for the op-ed pages. I'm not saying that there isn't a richness to the 3-hour, to the knocked out 3-hour, the 3-hour column. There's an intensity to it.
Sure.
And if you get it right, it can be a wonderful thing. I mean, Marina Hyde does it 3 times a week.
Yeah.
But for me, nothing is better than the long, slow crawl around a subject. And the most recent example I have of that is when I did a piece about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which appeared in Harper's in October of last year. And I spent 6 months on that piece.
I'd like to talk about that just in a moment, but we always ask on the podcast about money. And with this kind of peripatetic freelance existence, have you been able to make a living doing that?
Yeah, I make a living. I have to work very hard, but I make a living.
Yeah. And how has the financial side of it changed over the past, 2 decades?
Well, 15 years ago and even 10 years ago, you could, if you were lucky, pick up a 3-figure contract.
Right.
I mean, there'd be a downside to that, in that they own you. And if they own you, they own you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why I've never stayed anywhere, because I don't want to be owned. But that almost never happens anymore. And I think when this generation of very highly paid journalists goes, there won't be others. I mean, I dread to think what younger people are on. And
again, just before we go on to American stuff, you mentioned the Mail as an environment and things. Could you talk a bit more about that? It's a place that arises that creates very strong emotions, both in terms of readers and things like that. What was your experience of being within the belly of the beast?
Well, I feel the urge, and actually, the way you phrase that question made me think of it. Made me think of it again. I immediately feel the urge, to explain why I was at the Daily Mail. When the truth is, I'm a feature writer. I'm not really a columnist. I'm a feature writer. And so when I see somebody, no matter what they're saying, all I ever want to say is, tell me more.
Okay.
And I think the rush to judgment in journalism has done a lot of damage. I'm pretty tired of having people shout at me about things that I already know. And if I'm going to read a piece about Paul Dacre, I don't really want to read an 1,000-word piece about Paul Dacre. And as far as I'm aware, this piece has probably never been done. I don't want to read an 1,000-word piece on all the reasons why you think Paul Dacre is evil. I could write one of those for myself. I just think to be a feature writer, it is essential to be quite emotionally porous and to be able to see the world from their point of view.
Right.
Or you can't understand them. So my experience of being at the Daily Mail in my early 30s, although, I never shared their politics, and there have been times when I think they have really gone too far. I mean, really. And I'd be happy, to talk about the poisoning of political discourse and the way that things have become so polarised. I think the blaming of that man who burnt his children to death for a bigger house, blaming it on the welfare state, I thought that was absolutely disgraceful.
Sure.
But I like to say sometimes all newspapers are the same. And they're not all the same, but they are all very, very similar.
Why is that?
Why are all newspapers the same? Maybe I'm just very, very cynical. But, liberal newspapers are not the Elysium.
In terms of their working practices internally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really want to say too much about that.
Okay. Well, can we talk about Labour anti-Semitism then?
Oh, no, I was just going to tell you about the Mail.
Okay.
Very quickly.
Right.
I was going to say the
You're
experience...
going to answer the question. Okay.
The experience of working in the Daily Mail in Kensington High Street, and that electric, powerful, the engine of a powerful, famous newspaper, and, a huge broad vista, and Paul over his proofs, shouting at people in the office till 11 o'clock at night. I just thought it was incredibly exciting.
Right.
And I left after 6 months when I realised that they really were going to try and bend me to their politics, and I couldn't have that.
Okay.
But I'm really glad I did it.
Sure. In another message from our sponsor, we're giving top tips from tutors at the Faber Academy Creative Writing School on what makes a strong application.
The school's flagship Writing a Novel course is running again from January to June 2020, and the application requires both a 1,000-word writing sample and a letter.
Sabrina Broadbent, who teaches on the daytime version of the course, is looking for originality and determination.
In the writing sample, Sabrina says, "I'm on the lookout for latent signs of that rare thing, an original voice, which is hard to define yet unmistakable when you read it. It often emerges out of risk, nonconformity, and difference."
Richard Skinner, who set up the programme back in 2009 and is teaching on the evening version of the next course, is also looking for promise in both a potential student's writing and their ability to contribute to the group.
Of course we're looking for good writing, he says, but as long as a less polished piece has that certain something in it, that thing we're all looking for but can't name, then we're interested.
Applications closed for this iteration of the course on the 31st of December 2019. For more information, go to faberacademy.co.uk.
The course is available in 2 forms, an evening programme involving 1 evening class per week and 1 Saturday per month, alongside a daytime variant which is 1 morning per week plus an afternoon once per month.
Always Take Notes listeners receive a £250 discount by using the code AlwaysTakeNotes2019. Can we talk about that Harper's piece then, the anti-Semitism piece?
Yes.
So how was that how did you first, you'd done this piece for them about this restaurant, but how did this idea, was it yours or did they come to you?
It was my idea. I went to the Momentum conference, the World Transport in 2016, and I saw for the first time what I consider to be anti-Semitism in public.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated and a bit
particularly the things you quote in the piece, right? These
a bit
lines
frightened.
of, the woman talking about a lot of kind of moral equivalency and things like that. Was it you went to the conference before you had the commission?
Yes, I was writing a piece for the New Statesman about Momentum, and I was very gentle and kind and reasonable, and I try to see the world from their point of view. And I remember saying, if you agree with them, they're the sweetest people in the world, and if you don't agree with them, you're the devil.
Right.
And I think that the truth of that statement has been borne out.
Sure. Yeah. So how did you go about reporting the story?
Well, I went to a lot of events. I went to the Enough is Enough rally, and I went to the House of Commons to sit in the public gallery when Luciana Berger did her testimony about anti-Semitism in Labour in the front bench, because you have to go in public. You have to go in person, because you learn so much from the body language. Everything. Sure. I could tell so much from how Corbyn and Abbott felt about it from their body language as they were speaking. They didn't look at her, they didn't turn around, they sat there with their arms crossed. I had this fantasy, because I am drawn to the left, and I would love it if the leader of the Labour Party wasn't, awful. He could have just gone and said sorry. But he was. So I went to lots of events. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time with Jewish people who love Corbyn. Yeah. And who spend a lot of time saying that the anti-Semitism allegations are all manufactured by Tories, by Norman Tebbit, for profit. And I spent a lot of time with them. And actually, I got nothing out of that, because I always think if I spend that much time, I was spending time with people like Jackie Walker and Tony Greenstein. I always think I'll get someone, but I didn't with them. I had theories, but they couldn't vocalise for me, so I couldn't use them. So they remain for me a bit of a mystery.
And what was the experience of the editing and bringing this piece together? It's being published by a magazine in New York, a city that is a third Jewish. Reporting from a country where, as you say, the Jewish population is 260,000, that the demographic is very different. How did the Americans that you were working for kind of perceive this?
Well, they were great actually, because my first piece was shocked. It was shocked in tone. It was stilted. It was unusable.
Your first draft?
Yeah, my first draft. Yes. Yeah. So I had to rewrite it. And actually, I was very touched by this. The publisher of Harper's, a guy called Rick MacArthur, came to London, and we went out for dinner. I said, "Where have you been today?" And he said, "Oh, I went up to Golders Green.
Okay.
I wanted to see for myself."
Yeah.
But they don't. I mean, I don't know if the experience of other writers, but usually I just send in my copy and they say yes or no.
Sure.
And they rewrite it. I mean, I was very glad to write it, because I do believe that there's I'm sick of saying this politely. I think it's absolutely an infection. And just before you arrived, I was watching a video of a Jewish man and his small Jewish sons being abused on the London Underground before you came, because it is an obsession of mine now. But I'm glad to write about it. Bearing witness, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I know journalists who become terribly, terribly upset, when they see things happening they don't like, and you say, you're bearing witness, that's your job.
What was the reaction when the piece came out?
Well, it wasn't, it was reasonably muted. My Jewish people loved it, and most other people ignored it. Oh, I remember that the Jewish Voice for Labour were very, very angry with me, and they told me that I was an anti-Semite.
Okay.
But they're not subscribers.
Sure. Do you think the fact that the blunt reality of a piece sitting in an American magazine behind a paywall sort of changed the subsequent reaction or the kind of Twitter discourse or things like that?
Well, I've never really been slammed for this on Twitter. I mean, I had a long piece in the Spectator on this very subject 2 weeks ago, and I get no traction. I think they just don't. I think I'm not important enough for them. Okay. And that's fine by me. I mean, they can troll me if they want to. But on
this whole Twitter thing, can we come to the sort of Telegraph mannequin
sure.
story this year? So can you kind of give the context of that, of what took place?
Yes, I was writing a piece Sunday for Monday for the Telegraph op-ed page.
Sunday for Monday being they asked you on Sunday to write it for Monday.
Yeah, you write it on Sunday and then it runs.
So you get the commission on Sunday?
Yes.
Okay, right.
Bit of a graveyard slot Sunday for Monday, but
okay.
Never mind that. So I was looking for ideas, and I saw that Nike, the multinational company which only a couple of days ago was exposed as abusing its female athletes in its facility,
right.
Had developed this, I guess it would be a size 24 mannequin for their shop. So it was a size 24 exercise clothes. And I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I've been fat almost my whole adult life. And I was looking at that and I was thinking, body positivism. Yeah, it's great in theory, but at the end of the day, you're still, going to die young.
Okay.
And I'm not sure. I said I thought it was cynical. I said I thought that it was an extremely cynical move, maybe a little bit to make women think that just because they were wearing exercise clothes, their bodies wouldn't kill them, or their compulsive eating wouldn't kill them. And actually, I would definitely write that piece differently now.
How so?
Well, I actually wrote, journalism. I actually, about 2 months later, I wrote a piece saying that I would do it differently. But let me tell you what happened first, which is it got picked up, and I had my first real Twitter storm. And people were very, very angry with me because they thought that I was being very, very cruel to people who weren't well, to women who don't like themselves, to people who are overweight. And I was really upset by this for various reasons. The first reason is that I've been writing about feminism for years, and I've been attacking the fashion industry for years for this ideal. And the other reason I was upset was because it became so personal so quickly. Sexual threats, requests for my death, requests for my child's death. And even more that and I'm glad it happened because it taught me so much. I don't think a Twitter storm would bother me now. And I just think if someone does something you perceive to be evil and you respond to it by trying to annihilate their reputation and longing to annihilate who they are, I kind of think you've lost the argument. And I wrote a piece and I said I knew that they were angry, but I didn't really think it was about me. I thought it was about everyone who'd ever hurt them, including themselves.
What were the mechanics of the storm? I mean, looking at it in the kind of most analytical manner, what caused it to get such traction on social media? Was it shared by a particular influential person?
Yes, it was. It was shared by a couple of people with more than 1 million followers.
Okay.
And there are people with particular interest groups.
Yeah.
There are particular interest groups on Twitter, so it was all picked up by the fat acceptance movement or the body positive movement.
Right.
And I just...
And again, what was the timeline of the storm? I mean, I think Alistair Campbell once said that if you can ride a scandal for 7 days, or
It
whatever.
lasted 3 days.
Okay, so
And
what?
it
Yeah,
rolled around the
could you
world.
describe, in meteorological terms, how did the storm begin? When did it peak? What was the
Piece came out at
timeline?
11 in the morning. I started noticing it was online at 11, and then it got bad, and by about 3 o'clock it was bad, and then it hit America.
When America woke up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it got really bad.
Yeah.
And
Where were you?
I was at my home in Cornwall.
Okay.
And it's an extraordinary thing, actually. And I said this in the piece, I began to hate my own name. You doubt everything about yourself. Oh, yes, and one thing I did want to say about this piece, because I think I didn't actually get there because I was rambling so much, is I do think that I spoke about the mannequin with self-hatred. Because as I've said, I've been overweight my whole life. And I did speak about her with hatred. And that was my mistake. The other points I stand by.
Okay.
And I would like to remind everybody that she is still actually a mannequin.
Sure.
I insulted a doll. And then I became an avatar in my turn, which is probably a suitable...
Yeah, you were sort of you were sort of objectified by the mob.
Yeah, I was objectified, and I became a person that I didn't recognise.
So how, and again, just, from the sheer mechanics of it, so when you're in the middle of that, what happens? You're getting like 90 notifications a second. What's
I turned my notifications off, but I didn't know
Okay.
how to turn off private messaging, so I got some terrible private messages.
And were your messages open
Yeah.
to like the public?
I didn't know how to turn them off.
Okay.
So I was getting... And my poor husband just didn't know what to do because, he's from the 18th century.
Yeah.
But I had friends calling me, and I think it melded into my alcoholism, actually, because I said this in the piece, that to be an alcoholic for me is to have the voice of the assassin in your brain.
Right.
There's a reason why people drink themselves to death.
Sure.
It's not like Peter Hitchens says because they think it's fun.
Yeah.
It's the voice of the assassin in your head, the person inside you that wants to kill you. And the person who recovers from alcoholism is the person who succeeds a day at a time in repressing that voice to a certain extent. You can never annihilate it, but you learn there are various ways to repress it. And it really felt for me, it was one of the worst days of my life. I felt like that voice had come out into the world and had become alive and had a million voices. And I was sorry that I hurt them.
Did you
I'm
feel in
kinder
any way
now.
you could just close the laptop, go for a walk on the beach?
The
I mean, I
strangest
think
thing is I
that-
didn't really want to.
I mean, Gay Talese got caught in a Twitter storm without noticing. Do you know this story? That he made some comment that was pounced upon, and because he didn't have a smartphone, he was trending on Twitter with hatred and vitriol for a day, and he didn't know this happened. And did you ever feel that this existed in an extremely real way in one dimension, but that was a dimension you could step out of, or do you think those boundaries no longer exist?
I'm sure that's true. And I was ashamed of the original answer I began to give you, but you say you want full disclosure.
Always.
I didn't want to. I couldn't look away. And also,
Okay.
don't forget, there's a terrible self-importance to unhappiness.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
all alcoholics know that. Something was happening to me. And then I went to Scotland with Rolls-Royce because I used to review cars for Vogue. And I turned on the radio and they were talking about me.
Okay.
I was in the South China Morning Post.
Okay.
I was in the Irish Times. I was called an elitist in the Irish Times.
Okay. How much were you paid for the Telegraph piece?
Not very much.
Come on, you've got to say.
I'm not talking about money. How much are you going to pay me for this blog?
We don't pay you for this.
Oh, you're talking about... Okay, how much
But-
are you being paid for your Harper's piece?
I am being paid $1 a word.
Is that excellent?
Yeah. Now you have to tell us how much.
£300.
Okay. So for 300 quid, knocked out on a Sunday, your world falls to pieces on Monday. It's over by Thursday, or what's the time?
Over by Thursday, but I couldn't...
But the internet
I
never
couldn't
forgets.
write properly for about 3 months.
Okay.
I lost my voice.
Okay. And how did you get through that?
You wait. things get better, don't they? You know, I can also laugh about it now. It just seems so silly. You know, lots of people who've never met me took great exception to 30 words I wrote.
What is the... You know, this is, 6 months ago now that it happened. What, if any, enduring effects that experience had on your career or on your, you know...
It's made me braver.
Okay. And in terms of
I've had real reservations, because when I was working at The Guardian as a columnist, I was a fully paid up member of the immaculate social democracy, angels. And it's made me braver. It's made me more willing to say what I really think. And I've been watching what's happening to the left for a long time, partly because of the anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish, I can't ignore it, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
But I think it's made me harder. It's made me more willing to go my own way, say what I really think.
And in terms of, getting work and everything like that, what's been the impact on that?
No problem.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, I thought it might be, but it wasn't.
Is there the thing about not being able to look away? Is that because you're the center of this? Is there in some way that all journalists want to be the center of attention? You want your stuff to be read. That there is some complicated and difficult crossover between one's desire as a writer to have your work.
It had nothing to do with the writing.
Okay.
My not being able to look away had nothing to do with the writing.
Okay.
It was more the horror, I mean, I would love to know how other people feel about this. I mean, certain people can't stop getting into Twitter storms.
Yeah.
And, I'm hoping this will be my only one. And I'm worried that I sound too contrite, because I'm not. I think they behaved appallingly.
Right.
You don't send people messages telling them that you wish they were dead because they wrote something you don't like.
Were these from...
That's madness.
Were these from men or from women? What was the sort of spread?
That was from a man. I got a lot of messages from women saying they wanted to exercise and sit on my face. And I just think, how can you expect me to take what you're saying seriously if that's your response? And basically on that day, I ceased to take Twitter seriously. And also some of them were obviously just enjoying it. The buzz of virtue. Who was it? Who's the guy who writes about all this stuff?
John Ronson, yeah.
He wrote that it's about security, it's about gathering. That if you're all united in condemnation of another person, you are not only good, but you belong.
Yeah.
And that made me feel a great deal better. But basically, I can't take it seriously anymore. And I watch people, and things are getting so bad in Labour. And yesterday, everyone was having, the things they were saying about Rachel Riley, and I just don't take it seriously anymore.
What did she do? I saw she was trending on Twitter. What had she done?
Oh, she superimposed a message. I can't remember exactly what it said. Something to do with, Jeremy Corbyn being racist towards Jews, onto a photograph of him, and the message was superimposed onto the spot where he had a placard protesting against apartheid, and this is turned into Rachel Riley is erasing the experience of these people.
I see.
And a lot of talk about her being blonde and blue-eyed, and very little talk about the fact that she's actually a Jewish woman who is fighting against what I believe to be absolutely catastrophic outbreak of Jew hatred in this country.
So with the storm...
And those would be the same people who would disapprove of what I wrote.
Right. So with the storm, with the calm...
You're very interested in this storm.
Well, I think we'll call this the last storm question.
Okay.
But when does the calm return? Just in the timeline. It breaks out on day one. It peaks day two.
Peaks day two. People who have been asleep learn about it on day three, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And then it's just over, and you just feel...
And presumably there's another one about someone else on another corner of Twitter by that stage.
Yeah.
Can we talk about other... We'll leave the storm. But your kind of broader writing ambitions. Do you want to write books? Have you... where do you sit with...
I say I want to write books, but if I wanted to write a book, I might have written a book by now.
Okay.
I want to write a book about alcoholism.
Okay.
Adding to your enormous...
So why haven't you?
I don't know. I'm a bit scared. I'm scared that it won't be good enough. There's always something else to do. I'm a workaholic. When I get a commission, I don't ask myself, do I want to do this? I ask myself, can I not do it?
This hypothetical book that you haven't written, what would it be?
My unwritten book?
Yeah, what would it say?
My unwritten book, I don't think we should talk about the unwritten, but it doesn't exist. Peter Mackay from
That's
the Mail.
precisely why we should talk about
His
it.
definition of a story, his definition of a non-story is something that hasn't happened.
Right.
If it hasn't happened, it's not a story.
This isn't the Mail anymore. I want to hear about your unwritten
He's
book.
a very good journalist, Peter Mackay.
It's fine, but genuinely. But you clearly, you're fascinated in the stylistic properties of writing. You're writing at a very high level. You have the experience with the subject. What is blocking you on that project, do you think?
I think I'm scared it won't be perfect, and if it isn't perfect, and of course it won't be perfect,
Yeah.
I'll hate myself, because writing is how I form myself,
But isn't perfection the enemy of the good?
without question.
Yeah.
But I think I'd rather have it shining in my imagination of the piece of perfection that it is in my head, but could never be in life.
But I think I was once told by a theatre director that you start with a vision and you end with a compromise, right? And at some point, that shining city of infinite possibility has to be like brought down to earth. Trussed up, have the edges shone off, and something has to be. I mean, again, you don't have to answer this, but what would it be? A memoir? Would it be a reported book? What would it be?
I think it would be a memoir, but what I would try to do is try and give it a wider meaning. Just
Sure.
beyond my life. I miss the 90s. I'd like to write about the 90s.
Okay. What about them?
I was young.
Right.
The road narrows as you get older. I think I'm older than you. I'm almost 46. How old are you?
34.
Yeah, I'm much older than
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
The road narrows.
But I was,
I
I'm
think
old
this
enough
is a man thing, I think men do write their books. I wonder if men write their books and some women's books remain unwritten.
I'm not sure it's gender. I think huge numbers of people's books remain unwritten, and I think the act of writing books is that act by hook or by crook of going through feelings of terror and inadequacy that one thinks unique to oneself, but are actually universal to everyone who's ever tried, and that you have to, the thing is realizing, in my experience, that everyone feels like that, and it's just about getting through that.
So when I have a clear day to write my book, as I've had, and I've had enough sleep to write my book, so I can't blame tiredness, and I sit down in front of the computer and this vast abyss of nausea that even has a colour opens up just underneath my diaphragm.
Okay.
That's normal.
Well, that's your first sentence.
Really?
I don't know. I just find it, would you like to write books?
I really want to write this book. I've been obsessed by this book. I first decided to be a writer when I was 12 years old. I remember this very clearly. It was an autumn evening. It was my school in Kingston upon Thames, and they had very wide windowsills with very big old-fashioned radiators. And I sat on the windowsill. I could fit on the windowsill there, and I had this big pad of school paper, and I had a pen. And I remember looking down at this piece of paper and thinking, "My God, I can write whatever I want. I can write my own story."
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be a writer.
And you are.
I am a writer.
Can we talk about
Sometimes I'm a very bad writer.
Can we talk about?
But I do have something to say about that. So I think the line between good writing and bad writing is much thinner than you might imagine.
Okay. But do you think that, going back to the point, you think that men write their books and women don't?
I don't know. I just said that. I could get another Twitter storm for that. I have no idea.
That is true.
I don't know.
Don't worry.
I don't know.
We'll be in it together this time, Tanya. It's okay.
What?
We'll be in it together this time.
I have no idea if that is true. I haven't written a book. You've written a book. From the sample in this room, that is objectively true.
Fair enough. Cornwall. Why did you leave the great metropolis?
I left the great metropolis because I married a man from Wiltshire who couldn't possibly.
That doesn't explain why you moved to Cornwall.
He couldn't live in a village, and he had to live. He had to live in the countryside.
Hang on, he couldn't live in a village.
Sorry, he couldn't live in London.
Okay.
He was sad in London.
Okay.
He looked sad all the time.
Okay.
Like a dog is sad.
Okay.
So we had to move to the country, and we looked at the home counties, and I just knew without question that I would start drinking again if we moved to the home counties. And you move.
What, because of the sort of John Cheever-esque dynamics?
Can't breathe there. I need drama. And also, you end up in an arms race with other people who've fled from London, like the school gates, a sort of social arms race that, you don't even want to win. And I've been I've been going to Cornwall since I was a child, West Cornwall.
Okay.
The end of the end. And
Real Cornwall?
Well...
This isn't like St Ives and Rock and stuff like that?
Well, I'm quite near St Ives, but I never go there. Can't park. I go to the dentist in St Ives.
Right.
That's it.
Okay.
The dentist is the only rich person I know in Cornwall. He's the only person I know who sends his children to private school, which is the worst school. It's not the worst school in Cornwall. It's not a very good school.
Okay.
So we moved to Cornwall because I like the drama. So we've lived there for 2.5 years. And also my son. I didn't want to bring up my son in London because by accident I bought a flat and nobody told me that this flat was on the street, which is actually, it's Queen's Crescent in Camden Town, and it's on the boundary of 2 and possibly 3 gang areas.
Okay.
And it was murder town. There were murders.
You mean there's no postcode violence in Cornwall?
All the time. Oh, there is, but you kind of know your neighbours. Basically, I wanted to bring my son up in the 1970s. So we moved to Cornwall.
How old is your son?
He's 6.
How's he finding the 1970s?
He loves it.
Okay.
When he's going to 13, he's going to be so angry.
I was going to say, when do you foresee that, like, he will want, Xboxes and,
Oh, he's not having Xboxes.
multicultural friends and stuff like that?
Multicultural friends. He knows someone who's half Finnish.
Okay.
Well, he is actually the only Jewish child in West Cornwall. And we do go to synagogue.
In the entirety of the...
In West Cornwall, yes.
Right.
Not in the whole of Cornwall, but in West Cornwall, in that part, the Penwith Peninsula, at the very
Okay.
end, I would say yes. But he can come and live with my sister
Okay.
in London in holidays.
And again, we talked a bit about rightly cliches. Do you sit overlooking the wild Atlantic breakers?
No, I don't. I can't afford those houses.
Okay.
And also the Ys in Cornwall don't live on the hills, they live in the valleys.
I see.
So as climate change happens, that may change. And actually we have a river across from our house and it scares the life out of me. No, I write in bed.
Okay.
Do you think that's awful?
No,
Do you
it's
write
come.
in bed?
I don't write in bed, but this has come up on the show beforehand
Okay.
with Anna Cadrea-Rado, who has written in favour of writing in bed.
I just see what's the point if you sit at a chair and a table and there's I don't know.
And this is the final question because we're up against time, but has being outside London filtered into your writing? Do you think?
I think it has, and not necessarily in a brilliant way.
Okay.
In that the silence down there and the quietness, and there's definitely something going on with the air pressure down there because I feel tired so often.
Is there a scientific basis for this theory?
Mm?
Is there a scientific basis for this theory?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's my testimony.
Okay.
And who are you to argue with how I feel?
That's your truth, Tanya.
And so it sometimes makes me soporific for months, so I have to come up to London and inhale the
Smog.
The pollution, the smog, the throbbing thrill of the underground, and meet people like you, and then I feel alive again.
I feel privileged. I think that's a great point at which to stop. Thank you for being a super guest and for speaking so candidly about all sorts of things, and wishing you all the very best with your journalism and your book.
Thank you.
Hello, it's us again. I'm taking the initiative in this exit this time. We have a confession to make in that due to logistical reasons of me travelling, going on holiday shortly, we are recording this approximately 2 minutes after we recorded our last extra.
So what have you been up to, Simon?
Since then, I've just been...
Sitting.
I've been sitting. No, but we're gonna grill you ruthlessly this time, Ellie. So what have you been doing? You said off air you went to see a play.
I went to see Blank at Donmar Warehouse,
Okay.
which is all about kind of women in difficult situations.
Sounds up your street.
A female drug
Whoa.
addict.
Okay.
Whoa.
Female woe.
Oh, female. I am often suffering, but these women more than I. One was a recovering drug addict. One was unhappy. And
Did it have a heartwarming ending?
no.
Okay.
Anyway, I would give it 3 stars. There was a very dodgy scene in the middle that was just too on the nose and just completely incredible. And I
Do
left.
tell. What happened?
Well, it was just, when I'm all for kind of woke theatre, but it was trying to be way too woke in a way too like cringe. Like I wrote this in 10 seconds way. It was just awful. It was
Okay.
just...
I'm gonna guarantee that sounds like well up your street.
What, writing shit things and... have I sworn on this podcast before?
I mean, you have now.
Yeah, sorry. Don't go and see this play is what I'm saying.
This has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Eleanor Halls. I'm laughing because you're doing a sort of weird eyebrow dance.
Pull yourself together, Ellie.
You're fluttering your eyebrows like some sort of hapless Sorry, continue.
Hapless. Is that an adjective you associate with me?
I'm joking.
I'm devastated. Our producer is Nicola Keane. Our graphic design is by James Edgar, and our score is by Jess Danheiser.
Please do rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow
The
us.
only way you can salvage this extra is with like pitch perfect social media promo now. Everything has to be right.
You can find us on Twitter at Take Notes Always, or on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes.
It's all right, you've rescued it. It's good. We're also on Patreon at Always Take Notes if you'd like to contribute to our crowdfunding. Thank you.
Bye.